informé qu'il y avait des écrans dans la salle du goûter là-haut. Donc forcément, les gens nous regardent.
So we resumed our work. It would appear that people are watching us and following in greater numbers. So we're going to have a very, very intensive sequence. You know, there are messages that people hear over and over, probably a kind of filtering effect. You know, we're all the actors of our consumption. Our wallet makes us actors in consumption. Then there's something else that you should know, and that is that we are the kings and queens of yes, but. Yes, we have an important impact on the environment, but why do we get offered certain things? We have an impact, an extraordinary societal impact, yes. So why should we move to the next step? It's up to the government to legislate. And if the consumer was the actor of his consumption, you know, when there's none left, when there's too much, things do not go well. I'd like to have with us Jean-Laurent Casselli, journalist and essay writer, to join me here. Maybe he's going to put things back in their rightful place. Consumption, how can we accelerate the change? So Jean-Laurent Casselli, good afternoon. I said you're a journalist and essay writer. We have a mission. We need to dot the I's and cross the T's. Yes, indeed. We're all at the same level. So you agree we need to take up the challenge. Are you a gambler? Yes? Okay, so let's start with the game. Since this morning, a question I'd like to ask of you, friends internaut, in 2022, what is the percentage of people who had the impression that they changed the way in which they buy, use, and dispose of their clothing, footwear, and household linens? Is it 48%? What do you think? Well, 48, perhaps. Let's see. It was 14.5%. 14.5% say 48%. What about 58% of people who had the impression they've changed their way of buying? 58%? Okay. 58%. And how many people think that it's 68% the answer? I would like to say that it's more than 58% here. We're going to get the results from our internaut voters here. It's quite similar, the results. Pretty similar. So we see on internet, I would say that it's more around 58%. 40% people say about 58%. The right answer is 58%. So this does tend to put things in place. This is the result of a survey by Opinionway. You can find the results of the survey on the Refashion Day site. So here what we're going to do is, Jean-Laurent, you're a specialist on ways of life and consumption modes. You published a book on this not too long ago. You take part in the dialogue of the Jean Jaurès Foundation. For example, yes, there was a text that I wrote on the subject. You are with Jérôme Paubrier, the author of a book here, France Before Our Eyes. That's a nice title. France Before Our Eyes. That's an extraordinary work to do this panorama. Yes, this book is one that my co-author and I wanted to write to talk about the new French landscape. How the situation has evolved, how things have evolved since the 1980s. 1980s, a narcissistic country, following the 30 glorious years in the post-war period were over, and nobody had really said how French society had changed. This book was published almost a year ago, early October 2021. before the presidential elections and legislative elections. And so it's a tradition to propose a view of the French every 5 years. So in the last year, we've seen you everywhere, you and your co-author. Yes, we share the work. It's my co-author or myself, because we are invited to speak by professionals from different sectors, because this book talks a great deal about the day-to-day life of the French. You know, we talked about pools, the individual home, the question of mobility, leisure activities. We try to embody the situation. This book might look like it's academic and serious, and it is serious because there are a lot of maps, a lot of figures. We look at consumption from the geographical point of view, but we also wanted the book to be pleasant to read. There's a lot of precise information, references to a number of shows on TV concerning house hunting and things like that. Little things regarding French society. And I think that consumption and retail are part of these elements which make the book original. It's the book of the year. In fact, you received an award by a magazine. Yes, it's quite an honor to have this award. And here they rewarded a book which has some meat to it, yet it gives you information in an original way, a narrative way. So there's a desire to learn more on this subject. Do you think the subject is something people want to learn about? Yes, there's an analysis. There's an analysis done at the good level, at the right level. You know, people talk a lot about buying power. You know, I mean, for geopolitics, I can look at BFM TV. But here, we've tried to be closer to the day-to-day life of the French, try to look at the ethnology of the French consumption. We're going to continue along that line that you've developed in France before our eyes. I would say, I think we're going to have an exchange, like a conversation. Can you perhaps sketch the panorama of our consumption in 2022? And then we will try to project ourselves towards the future, 2050. Yes, excellent, excellent. That's what I had planned. So what do we start with? Well, let's go in order, chronological order. We start with the starting point, and perhaps we can go on to the next slide. Thank you. I think you understood that our starting point, our rather original matrix, was the 30 glorious years. Those are the 30 years after World War II, where the French have a certain nostalgia for these years, which were boom years. It's a period that everyone identifies as one of economic and social progress, growth, and a number of iconic objects appearing in our day-to-day life, the post-war reconstruction of the country, the advent of cars that were more democratized, and the consumption, the growth in consumption with the hypermarkets, the major retailers appearing on the scene. You saw the format here in the slide of one of the first hypermarkets, Carrefour. And the 30 glorious years, which ended in the 70s, was a very long trend, ended in near the 80s. And at the time, the 60s to the 80s were the years where, in fact, people had more means and resources. Here you have a top, a top, representing French society. You know, the top includes a very large middle class, which included the skilled workers, the upper managers. So it was it's not that they were all the same, had the same wage. They obviously had different income, but there was a certain uniformity in lifestyles, especially in terms of consumption. And this with the advent of the barbecue, because in the 80s, if you went to a villa in the southern France, you'd have a pool and a barbecue. If you went to a house in the suburbs, people had barbecues. Everybody had barbecues. And it was fine. Everybody had the right to, everyone shared that moment, that barbecue. And at the time, it was the analysis that was made. That is to say, there was a certain uniformity, socially speaking. Even if people did not all have the same income level, people perhaps didn't fill their shopping cart with the best products, but everybody had access. It was quite emblematic. Here you have a generic approach here in terms of Carrefour, the hypermarket, had equipment, clothes, had almost all products under the same ceiling, and it had customers from all walks of life. So for me, this is quite iconic. It was very much linked to that central figure, the middle classes. What we explain in the book, this model has not disappeared. You'll see that the hypermarkets were, frequented by 60 to 70% of the population in the 70s. Today, still 42%. But the French society today is seeing a real segmentation of social classes with the specialization of the consumption formats and circuits. This means that top is retracting, it's shrinking, it's no longer in the shape of that top, which had this big middle section, a big middle class. In fact, now it looks more like a time glass, if you like, with few at the top and more at the bottom. What's happening since the 1980s, in fact, well, we won't talk about the barbecue, but at the time, Lidl and the other discounters were appearing on the French market. And Aldi as well, these German hard discounters were appearing. And this is the first axis where you see that people are being pulled towards the bottom. The generic hypermarkets are faced with this competition from the bottom. Hard discounters, low prices, and you see a sign of the evolution in the consumption mode. And, what we see is that you have part of the population which has moved upwards and people going down, And here, in fact, the hourglass, you have more of an hourglass shape where the middle section is shrinking, more near the bottom and fewer at the top. And the customer base of these different types of stores are going to change. Then the other aspect we can talking about is that you now have people who no longer go to the hypermarket, people who are not going to hard discounters, but it's people who are either going to consume less or consume in local shops where things are bought unpackaged, for example. Also, or, things are presented in crates. It's not that people are consuming less at a lesser price or more at a higher price, more at a lesser price, excuse me, and less at a higher price, but rather the people are consuming in alternative ways, organic and other types of shop. Now, to finish with the food retail sector, here you see something which is typical of the fragmentation, and that is the bakery. you need to know that until the 80s, the 90s, the bakery was an artisan, a craftsman. People would go buy the baguette, a product which was quite uniform throughout the territory, and then certain specialty breads. But in recent years, we see two phenomena where we see, in fact, the fact that things are changing. People at the top consume differently from those at the bottom. You know that in the peripheral areas, in the suburbs, people go to bakeries, in shopping centers, in parking areas. In fact, in the urban area, the bakeries have remained. But if you look at the maps that you find in the book, you see on the left-hand side, you see, in fact, a kind of growth in these new types of industrial bakeries. You know, in the 2020, you have a brand which has been created in the Rhone Valley and which is setting up business a bit everywhere. In red, you see these peripheral large capacity bakeries, which are always located in the suburban area, in the peri-urban area. Then you have another example where you see things are changing with the arrival of bakeries, which are focused on natural products, with the traditional approach to bread making, etc. And here, this is a bit more upper market. The bakery, you know, is an iconic product for the French, and we see that something is changing even if the general model continues to exist. So that was a major detour by the food sector. And so this is a reading of our civilization and the way it changes. I think that the food sector was a pioneer in the large retail sector. It's a good model to study here because I think that this was among one of the first things to appear. And I also wanted to talk about, I'm looking at the clock. Is that the time we have left?
It gives you an indication. Okay, I'll speed up a bit. But I wanted to focus on a topic I worked on connected to consumption. And that's more on the demand side. And there's an emergence of what we call ultra-consumption, other consumers. It represents the same thing. People are not happy today with the consumption society, and they want to consume in a different way. So I wanted to focus on a sociologist, an American one. Her work was never translated, but I think that she'll called Alquette, Elizabeth Currid-Alquette, and she explains that there is a segment of consumers coming from the higher level of education, and in some media there's a new, let's say, social class that she calls the aspirational class, and I call it ambitious in French because it wants to become better in the way it consumes. So that class has let's say enough money, but the definition is more connected to the level of education, and this has an impact on the way these people consume. It's a different type of urban bourgeoisie, so they do not behave like the former bourgeoisie, where you piled up products, luxury products and things like that. No, it's not that bling bling type of consumption. Why? Because the years of globalization have made it possible to different social categories in the Western world to make the most of the major brands, whether and therefore in the prêt-à-porter area, it's not that the people consume less, but they look for other status markers, objects that are not more expensive, but that that would go and visit Patagonia. Well, yeah, we see a few examples of these brands you're talking about, this different way of consuming for that class. Yes, and this is also the way the market answered that. Part of the social and cultural elite is less focusing on consumption, and a good illustration of that was given last spring by the revolution of the young students. I think their video is seen 14 million times, and I would like to quote some things that have said. In fact, they were young students who, when they were supposed to get their diploma, they said that they didn't want to work in the agro-food business like their fathers or mothers had done. And one of the persons said, "What life do we want? A cynical boss, a wage that makes it possible for you to take the plane, not even 5 weeks to rest, a burnout at 40. So it was maybe a bit naive, but this is what the alternative elite looks like. And their references are different. And I think that there's a whole generation of small brands that meet the requirements of that elite. And we have seen the brand 1083, for example. These are, in fact, millennials, people born in the 80s, 90s. And I have the impression that they are creating brands like the Slip Français, brands that meet the expectations, these expectations that are reforming the consumption society. So you talk about a social marker, having a Slip Français, a 1083 gene, and eating maybe a vegetarian. These are social markers. And if you say that, it can generate separations in society. Before we talked about the good pupils of the consumption society and in the fashion world. And in the area of brands, you have the good pupils, for example, these brands who refer to these elites, to these vanguard people, especially in the area of prêt-à-porter. And the way people talk about fast fashion today it's a bit like fast food before. Today it's fast fashion. We see, for example, these buildings collapsing in Bangladesh, for example. This is equivalent to what we said about fast food 20 or 30 years ago. Now, fast fashion, in fact, 10 years ago, I bought a T-shirt. I wasn't even aware of how the price was set. But today, the young brands, in fact, you talked also with Loom, a very interesting brand, a brand that communicates on the actual construction of the price and the value chain. Yes, for example, when you yes, if you see the Patagonia narrative, for example, they say, do not buy that jacket if you do not need it. So there is a certain paradoxical communication of these brands. They're asking us to be better consumers and to reduce our consumption. And this can, in fact, seem a bit contradictory, because if you wear that jacket, people will say, you are the vanguard. And someone at the time said, when you wear these brands, it's like you're a saint in the area of consumption. Or it can also mean that you have the means to buy the product. Yes, in the ethic fashion, there are two, in fact, barriers. First of all, it's the purchasing power. In our book, in fact, we had done a small table comparing the prices of fast fashion brands that you all know and ethical brands. And we saw that for a dress, the multiplying factor was 1 to 3. Same thing for a sweater developed in Europe or in Asia. Same thing for sneakers or underwears. And if you decide that you want more than one underwear, something like a dozen, the entry price is higher, and it's more, in fact, customers who have the means to go for that virtuous choice. So this is why the brand says it's not an underwear you're buying, but it's a whole history. Yes, those brands is quite interesting because there's this idea, as Thomas said before, it's not just storytelling, it's their own existence shows, illustrates their commitment. It's their these brands, in fact, they have a certain raison d'être, and therefore they exist. So yeah, it's quite interesting that we have a generation of brands, I'd say committed, but it's not really a commitment as such. But inside the store, we say, we're not like you, we behave in a different way, and we can point to certain bad pupils, for example. So what I also wanted to say concerning ethical fashion and a possible extension of these consumers, there's the purchasing power that can be a barrier, but also a cultural aspect. For example, secondhand is cheaper, but what is paradoxical is that those who adopt this different way of consuming would have the means to go on consuming before. It's like a cyclist who has a purchasing power will not always decide to buy an SUV. I don't want us to talk about 2050, but maybe we see some trends and a sort of divide between people. Well, I think that things are becoming harder. I don't know if you've listened to the political discussions. We talked about the end of urban sprawl, individual houses. We've talked about the end of internal combustion engine cars. We talked about the end of certain ways of eating and products we eat. And some people think, oh, this is terrible. People are attacking my way of life. And another example, it's also boycotting Black Friday. You talked about flash sales. That system that leads to making people think that they have a need for this or that. In fact, ethical brands today are boycotting these promotion events, and they communicate on that. They say, no, this is not for us. We don't want our customers to hunt down a promotion and to buy, because we know that there's something negative behind that. So here again, there's a question of narrative, and we have to be careful in the way we handle this, because we see that it can be, of course, a strong point, but it can be also an obstacle for many people to adopt this, let's say, good for the planet way of consuming. And Laurent, we went in the street to speak with consumers, and I recommend you look at these people we interviewed in the street, and then we'll meet again to comment on that. What do consumers say? Their purchasing frequency. Well, I buy when I need something. I don't buy tons of things. I don't buy a lot of clothing. I wasn't used to that when I was young, but it's also maybe because of my social environment. No, I don't go shopping too much, maybe once a year. I don't think I'm a big clothing fan. I keep my clothes a long, long time until I can't use them anymore. No, I don't buy clothing frequently, maybe 1 or 2 sweaters per year. No, I don't buy very many new clothes. And normally it's my wife buying for me, and the frequency, in my opinion, is not that great. No, I don't buy too many clothes, but I do buy in the big brand stores, maybe 2, 3 per month. I consume a lot of clothes. This year, I didn't buy that much. In fact, because I bought during the sales in June, July. Now, I calmed my purchasing recently. I don't buy a lot, and sometimes I buy in the chain stores. I also buy on internet. Do you buy new clothes or secondhand? For a long time, I only bought secondhand clothes. It's nice, but it also depends on your morphology. For trousers, I have lots of difficulties. Only new things, new items. Well, it depends. I sometimes go to stores selling secondhand. Secondhand when I was young for questions of financial means, but new clothes. I don't often go to secondhand shops, but maybe more and more. It all depends on the items. For T-shirts, sweatshirts, jeans, it would be new products. Resell or give away? The clothes I don't wear anymore, I give them. I give them to members of my family who like that, because they don't maybe have the same budget, so they're happy to be given something that is still nice, but that I don't like anymore. So yes, I do that rather than sell on sites. Well, if I see it doesn't fit me anymore, I give to charities or members of the family. I don't throw away. No, I don't resell a lot. No, I use them until they're completely worn. I'm not. Oh no, I don't really resell my clothing. They don't have the quality to be sold again. So either I give them away, I put them in collection banks. Those who are good, I take them to Emmaüs, and if they're deteriorated, I'd put them in banks. Or some stores also are happy to take them back. Are you aware, or do you have in mind the impact on the environment? Yes, there are some items I don't buy anymore. Those that come from Asia, where there's child labor, I don't buy that anymore. I think we're more aware of those issues a little bit, but no, just a little bit. Well, at one point I was really interested in that. I paid a lot of attention, especially for footwear, handbags, and clothing, accessories. Yes, for a few years now, we see that the production is relocated in Asia, and so we try to buy brands or clothing that are made as locally as possible. Yes, I try to keep that in mind, but there's another point, there's a question of size. Yes, it also has a certain price. At one point I didn't have enough money, so I bought what I needed, and it was not always ethical brands. So thank you, Celine. Thank you, Alexandre, for that video. So how do you react to that? Well, this is what we see in the surveys on consumption when you ask questions like, do you think we should do something to fight against climate warming? You have 99% of people answering, yeah, we should do something, but then they go on living as they do. So we should also say that you have a vanguard group, which is very much aware. You have a majority of people who don't give a damn, and then you have people in between. And in the food industry, we call that the flexitarians. And you're looking for the flexitarians of fashion. So they're not going to hang to their former model. They're not going to focus just on ethical companies, but they're becoming aware of things and they're moving slowly in one direction. And when we listen to the video, we see that some people have a lot of contradictions, but they're aware of the challenges and they know that we need to do something. Okay, a game now. A small question among the following solutions. What is the one that is preferred by the French people to give a second life to their clothing? Selling, giving, repairing, renting. So in the room here, in the audience, raise your hands. What is the solution that is the preferred one? For people, do they want to sell their clothes or give? Let's say maybe a majority here. Repairing? Yeah, it's complicated to answer after the other two solutions. Renting? Is it interesting? Is this an emerging trend? At the beginning with internet, there was a certain myth, people said, these startup companies renting a drilling machine for 3 days. But in fact, we saw that people did not turn to those services because they preferred, in fact, to buy one rather than asking the neighbor to borrow it. So the thing you rent, well, it's difficult. People were not that interested. Maybe, yeah, they were afraid of the quality or whatever. Anyway, people know exactly that when they buy such a machine, they won't use it more than 3 times in their life. So 92, give away. So so the French people, 83% prefer to give away. And now the 4 R's, can you quote them? I need to look at the video. Reduce, recycle, repair. There was another one we saw in the cloud of words, but we'll look at the video on the 4 R's. Reduce, no, I don't consume a lot. No, reduce, no. I love it too much. No, I'm not trying to reduce my consumption. It's not in my project. No, reduce, no, because I do not consume that much. But I'm aware that it's important to reduce and turn to secondhand or a more quality consumption with products that are maybe more French or produced in Europe rather than fast fashion coming from Asia. Repair. Well, no, I don't know how to sew. So sometimes I have friends who do it. Well, it depends on what it is. So maybe a button, yeah, I can repair it. But a whole, well, if I do like the item, yeah, I'll make an effort. But no, usually, no, or if it's trousers, I'll cut them and make shorts. Well, this jogging, for example, there I'd seen tricks how to repair it. And if I like, I try and repair. On the trousers, there's not really. Oh, I have a grandmother, so she repairs my clothes. Yeah, my grandmother also repairs my clothes. Yeah, I can't do it myself. Yes, I repair the clothes because I know how to sew a bit. So yeah. Yeah, my mother knows how to repair, so no, I don't really repair. Maybe if it's just a little hole. Well, I don't make holes in my clothes, so otherwise I throw it away, but I do not repair, no. Reuse. I know that we can reuse some socks and make sponges out of it. I know we can do it, but I don't do it. Yeah, I have clothes I've been wearing for 40 years because physically I haven't changed that much. But there are some clothes that I worked for a long time. Others, I got rid of them more quicker. No, I don't do a lot of recycling, but what I tell my friends, if you don't like what you bought, try and give it away to someone around you, because I think it's a sad thing to throw away clothes in a good condition. Well, I can give the clothes to friends if I don't like the clothes anymore, but there are these sort of banks, collection banks, where you put them. I have a lot of old coats of my parents, for example, that I reuse my father's coats, and for cleaning also, I reuse also old clothes in some cases. Recycle. Recycle, yes, I give away to friends or to some charity organizations. Well, sometimes in my family, I give it to younger people, cousins, for example. I usually give them or put them in these containers of banks, unless they're deteriorated, I would throw them away. But if there's another solution, I don't throw them away. I give them to my sister. My mother gives me her clothes in some cases. Okay, I would like to say a word about this. Yeah, long live grandmothers and mothers, who know how to repair. Yes, they're very important. Let me say something. Clothing and footwear that cannot be reused, you should not throw them away. You can also deliver them to collection points, 45,000 collection points, and on the Refashion site. And all that will be recycled, reused. So it's crucial not to throw that away. And I wanted to come back to the diagram we saw this morning. In the 66 sorting centers in France and Europe, you see 60% reuse, 32% recycling, energy 0.8. So it's important to keep all that in one's mind. We have little time, but I would like to know, what can we do now? What should we do? I think that the question is connected to our imagination. A desirable consumption society, what does it look like? We haven't answered that. If you look at influencers, that's on the social media, the R&B clip, if you look at these very popular things, what are you going to see? You're going to see jacuzzis, swimming pools, luxury hotels, private jets. So far away from all these alternative things we've talked about when we think about the future of the consumption society. It means that part of the people have not been taken on board this new sort of dream. So there's another possibility. It's constraint, but we don't want that, to take people in a democratic way to a different way of consuming, you have to, develop a desire for that. It's not constraints or regulatory constraints. And so this is what we have to try and find. So it's the narrative, it's the imagination, and not just the rules and regulations, which are important. So we have to work on that, and also model roles concerning alternative consumption that are attractive to everyone, not influencers in faraway countries. Yes, and thank you very much. And one word in redefine the consumption society and an attractive future for consumption in the different sectors. Thank you very much, Jean-Laurent Casoli.
Let me accompany you off stage. So it's 4:45 p.m. And if this was the right time to say stop to consumption, should we stop everything? Are we going to stop everything? No. That we need to rethink our relationship to consumption. Several times over, people have spoken of the storytelling that's necessary. We need to point out that for the correct functioning of our society, we're all interdependent in the consumption chain. We all have a role to play, from the regular buyer to the inhabitant of Ghana looking at the mountains and the rivers with no concerns. We spoke of confidence. And people say, yes, but that's not really me. I bought it because blah, blah, blah. So, these are all the little arrangements that you can make with your conscience to justify your purchasing. So I suggest we now call Paul Charon, Adrien Rivière, Élise Moron, et Annelise Decadre for this discussion. So please have a seat. I really have the impression of being at home the way I invite everyone. So, in fact, Paul Charon, you are co-founder of Homage, the brand. What is Homage in 2 words? It's a brand for a platform of buying and reselling clothing. And I'm also part of an association which does positive lobbying to have the law change and that fashion chain reduce its impact. So Élise Marin, you're a plastic artist. Aline, thank you very much for being here. You're replacing Clément Perrault. So you're a consultant. And you, in fact, have shown the adaptation capacity of your firm. So you're a consultant. We accompany companies in their transition, in fact. So we talked about climate and the importance here. Adrien Rivière, you are the founder of Resonance. What is Resonance? It's a question of recreating the storytelling, what we do on a day-to-day basis, and exchanging with artists on the ability to create new grids for understanding what's happening here. Adrien, I'd like to start with you. We're going to talk, we've talked of consumption, of the imaginary. When we prepared this session with you, we said that mankind with a capital M cannot evolve on the planet without having a story. This is a question which is very open in science. One of my tasks is to accompany companies and leaders, directors, to tell the story of their company, their sector, their industry. So I help them in the storytelling, whether it's fashion and other things. Since forever, mankind has, in fact, did storytelling And this obviously has evolved with our brain capacity, but we've always told stories. When your children come home from school, they don't give you PowerPoint made up of a bunch of slides. No, but they can tell you the story in detail. No, they tell us, where during playtime, the teacher said this or that. No, we are part of a big story, and we are constantly telling a story. And this is what I have said in a work that I published called Ishmael at the beginning of the 90s. And it's a dialogue between a young 30-year-old who was a bit lost, didn't know exactly what meaning to give the system that we are in. So he's exchanging with a wise man who, in fact, is a gorilla. A gorilla is named Ishmael. So the story that we tell is something we construct, and it could have been different. So it's something that we are doing on a day-to-day basis. Our story becomes a kind of background for what we do every day. It's difficult to move away from it, and this is why Resonance, to have another grid for reading what is and interpreting what is happening. So what's interesting here is to, first of all, deconstruct what we consider to be obvious. And because it was obvious, we no longer see it. Is there a method for this? Is there a method for this deconstruction? Yes, of course. The climate fresco, the way to do things differently, the idea of having an initiative like Homage, 1083, something which is going to confront the story we've been told, maybe in a very abrupt way, but you know that the majority of brands in the world of fashion and clothing have been built on the idea of growth, performance, profitability, development, market share, etc. So it's true that brands, just to speak rapidly, like L'Homme and like yours, for example, one of their pillars is to consume less, not just better, but to consume less, to reduce consumption, thus production. And what that means is at the end of the story, if everyone consumes less, if everyone produces less, and even if we don't exist, there'll just be exchanges and reuse, then we would all win. We would not end up with the same society. If using these brands, new brands, to tell a new story. Jean-Laurent Casserie gives us the impression that this story is embodied in day-to-day objects, iconic places, etc. What's extraordinary with stories is that each story has two sides: what we say, the words, what we tell, and then you have the acts. Otherwise, it's just washing. So, people say, well, thank you for the announcements, but there's nothing behind it. So the two go hand in hand and can be seen in day-to-day gestures, things that we can really do. And because we can really do it, then the story is going to develop, grow. Sometimes we start doing something, we don't realize we've started doing something. Then after a few weeks later, we do a post-rationalism, post-analysis, and we realize, oh, but this tells a totally different story. So quite clearly, it is normally the two that do this. In the 1970s, when Patagonia was created, the idea was to tell a different story, and this will always take the form of facts and actions. Unless you have something that was original and you have to try to tell what is going to happen. And there you have to be very good at storytelling. Thank you, Adrien. Elise. Adrien has spoken. And here, artistic creation is also part of deconstruction. So how, with contemporary art, can you accompany that transformation or relationship to the dream through our sensitivity. When you listen to a discourse which is based on philosophy, on literature, as well as rational thought and a capacity to be able to do marketing analysis, etc., an economic rationale. Whereas I'm proposing something else, something complementary, by proposing experiences. This is the data mining panorama. This is a fragment of a bas-relief, which is more broadly part of an artistic approach. My practice, here you see the work on the full scale of the work. Now, to speak concretely on this project, once again, this is a project among others. Even if formally speaking, there are variations depending on the materials I use, there is always a story to be told with a challenge, a material, and a place. To be concrete here, in fact, was an order that I received, and I asked to have computers from their offices with the possibility of having just a few milliseconds to accelerate certain financial flows it was Bloomberg, in fact, which looks at metals that we're going to need. I have a real sensitivity for the use of the digital in my work. So I took the computers from this city because they already had, in fact, a certain history. They were crushed in a factory, which allows us to recycle things, which allows you to separate the ingredients like metals, depending on the type of metals. I extracted certain metals. I reorganized this on a facade on the basis of a drawing of a landslide that took place in the United States with a copper mine. And so, in fact, here you have several readings here. I put material back into this industry, put the geological time back into the work here, in fact, because of the tools used. And then it becomes very abstract, like the formation of a mineral. And in the background, what corresponds to the landslide provoked by this mine is a financial flows, which when you look at the landscape allows you to superimpose the different ores. So this bas-relief is perhaps an artistic vision which allows us to be seen as an object that you like or you don't like, that is personal. And this will depend on one's culture. But it's the production process behind it which is interesting. It is a challenge as such. It was documented, and it is part of the work. Can we zoom on these pictures? This is a project dating back to 2011. It's one of the first projects I initiated to put that materialism with the digital. This work was something done upstream to create a kind of imaginary landscape, to in fact show a kind of monumentalism that I fully assume to have a dual effect of fascination and repulsion. And this perhaps expresses a emotional state that we can encounter between attraction and repulsion. This calls for a lot of manual work. Here, in fact, you have CDs that are unsold. And here, in fact, we're dealing with two very popular artists. And this overproduction is integrated into the marketing plan. And as a result, the individual cost of a CD is interesting. So the overproduction is integrated in the production process. And I thought it was interesting to work on a landscape which was more linked to the absurdness, a day in France. In an artistic work, this can be appreciated by the people, in fact, who have worked upstream. I worked with prisoners. I worked with all kinds of people. And so the production process as well is very interesting in terms of the end result. Let's go around the table and we'll come back for questions. Paul. Paul, are there not other choices than having to think in terms of sobriety, especially as far as textiles are concerned? Well, the short answer for me, if I was to be abrupt, I would say no. No, we have to address sobriety. I have a company which is based on reuse. You know that we have this clothing platform which aims at simplify things for everyone. There are sales people who sell and others who buy. The French have cupboards full of clothes they don't wear. So put these back into circulation to facilitate the task. As far as the buyer is concerned, give the buyers something that they're used to seeing when they buy, with clothing that is well presented, etc. And this so as to encourage people to stop buying new clothes. Use the clothes that you have in your cupboards to reduce production. Why do we need to reduce the new production volume? Well, I think that I'm sure everyone knows that fashion creates social and environmental problems of a considerable size. With the advent of fast fashion and with e-commerce, all of this has added to the problem. In addition to that, you have brands, fashion brands from China, etc., where every day you have new clothes stores that are come online. And, you have production methods which have really rivaled each other in terms of their ingenuity to encourage overconsumption. Today, in fact, people buy on an average 40 pieces of clothing a year and will only wear about 40% of them. So 20 billion pieces of clothing in France for 67 million inhabitants. Today, if we were to stop all production, we could still live 50 years on the inventory of existing clothes production. Why continue to cultivate cotton? Why are we going to continue to dry marshes to be able to grow products to produce clothes that are going to be sent all over the world and people will wear them twice and then leave them in the cupboard? It's absurd. So that in itself could be questioned because of the absurdity. There is the need to take care of this environment which we've deteriorated. So how can we do better? And not just better, but less. If we do better, we can eco-design a number of things. We can create clothing. We can recycle plastic to produce clothing. But you will always need new plastic to mix and blend with the old plastic to create clothing. In the end, you'll have less, you'll have waste. Cotton consumes a great deal of water. You can have organic cotton, certified cotton, labeled cotton, but you still have that very important water footprint and thus an impact on the environment. Today, in fact, there's a real movement to produce in France, to revive and preserve the textile sectors and know-how. This is an initiative we want to encourage, and this should lead to a reduction in consumption. I don't know if you've tried to buy clothes bought in France, made in France, but they cost a lot more money because the French production model integrates energy and the entire supply chain and social costs. The social costs are integrated into the price of the clothing. So, this in fact is something that people who are doing harm to the environment are benefiting from, because when you buy something made in France, you realize the real cost of an item of clothing. Do you think we need to work with a regulation, an obligation? Well, that's an excellent question. I think that the answer is perhaps multiple. That very often people say it's the consumer's fault. The argument behind fast fashion is that we produce because the customer demands this. We try to satisfy the needs of a consumer. When we put a new collection online, within a week, it disappears. Etan once said that you needed to have a sustainable fast fashion, which is crazy. Because it's not just a question of volume. It's a question that people are answering a need. It's a question of reviewing the process. That if you put yourself in the shoes of individuals, the creator of the Plume brand uses an image that I like. If you put someone in a store and everything's at €1, well, no matter whether you wear blinders or not, you're going to end up buying something, because there are all kinds of signals sent by the company, very subtle signals sent by brilliant marketing teams, and people will buy something. So, people will buy. So I think that the approach whereby we put the blame and the guilt on individuals is not the right approach. We put a lot of things on the ultimate consumer. But I think we ask for people to be trained about this. But this would call for a totally new storytelling, which would not be based on profit only. I think the most rapid lever would unfortunately be a regulation or a law, like with tobacco, like with alcohol, elements which are considered to be harmful to our health. We could do the same for things which are harmful to the planet. Aline, for you, Aline, you have the desire to explain. You want to deal with the pedagogy to enable people to make a conscious choice, educated choice. When you have everything around you that's €1, it's difficult. So your tool is climate. Yes, that's my tool. For you, what's most important in your explanation of the climate impact? The most important, I could speak for an hour. I think that for me, what I would like with regard to the climate, in a climate fresco, it's a workshop which is going to last 3-4 hours, a whole afternoon, for people to become truly aware of the challenges and stakes involved in terms of the climate change. It can be in many sectors, in the textile sector, of course, as much as others. It's a mean of understanding the ins and outs of a subject. You spend 3-4 hours, first of all, regarding the observations, what has been observed, it's a problem, how to change it. In the second part, the most important, now that you are familiar with this, what are you going to do? Now, obviously, we're not going to leave with a very detailed action plan after half a day, but it allows us to stimulate the reflection. We're not going to spend too much time on the observation, but we're going to move to this next phase, which is, now what do we do? I think that when you work in a group with a facilitator who can moderate the workshop, it's like a game. It's fun. It's fun. We have cards that we use. It's a card game. We look at elements from the last IPCC report regarding climate. The report is huge, a huge scientific literature, and you understand the principal information that you have in the last IPCC report in 3 hours. This workshop, what I want to do when I animate such an workshop, whether it's a workshop for elected officials, company directors, or children, I think it's important that you need to really get to know a subject better than what you think you know. The subject can be overrepresented in the media, but not all that well understood, which is a paradox. So it's a question of make the invisible visible. The CO2 is a fundamental issue, yet it's not visible. Earlier, you spoke about the dematerialization, the digital technology. We don't see what was necessary, the energy necessary to produce this computer, the emissions, the CO2 emissions, and other pollutants that were released, but which are invisible to me when I bought the computer, when I bought the iPad, etc. So really, this is something which allows us to make people aware, make people understand things they thought they had understood. The other important point is how the figures, which are well known, are not understood. When we talk of 2 degrees of temperature rise, as in accordance with the Paris Agreement, what it means is that we have to keep the climate change under an increase of 2 degrees. If you ask someone, are you afraid of 2 degrees increase? No. No, exactly. 2 degrees in 2100? No, that's not a problem. We have time. No, we don't have time. 2 degrees is enormous because we're talking of the average temperature. 2 degrees above the average temperature. We're familiar with weather, but not climate. There are different things, weather and climate. And so 2 degrees is about half of what separates us from the last glacier period. If you look at the Ice Age and today, that 2 degrees is slightly different and not much. Yet look at the difference in climate between then and now. And so I think that after the workshop, people tend to understand the problem, even if they've heard a lot about it. So it's a question of setting out the basis and have people reflect on the subject in a more impacting way. When we look at the question of deconstruction and when we talk about the storytelling, we see that there are several approaches. There is one whereby we could show a horrendous picture of a mountain of textile along a riverbank in Benin in Africa. Then there's the more happy approach, more fun approach. Here, well, is everything possible? Or should we avoid these shocking pictures? Avoid? No, no, no. I think very often in our storytelling, we want to give enthusiastic stories, not too scary. Because do I project the best for a utopia so as to ensure my children live in that situation? Or do I show the worst and show them I don't want them to live in that kind of situation? The thing is, both are useful. And what do you learn from these stories, from the utopia and the dystopia? And what do you learn from the story? In a story, you have a plot, what's happening, and then you have this subject that you retain. The same thing is true here. You have to look at these mountains, you have to look at documentaries, etc. You can use overproduction, integrate it, and do it with something. Use it for artistic purposes, give it to the needy, It depends. So to build and deconstruct this story implies that you need to have information, training, and try to look at the apocalyptic prospects as well, bring those into play as well. In my opinion, you need both there. In my opinion, it's very important to have both when you tell a story. Some of you are going to be more sensitive to hope and enthusiasm, so this will motivate you, while others, in fact, are going to react more if they see a totally abysmal situation. It depends on your education.
Don't hesitate and go on asking questions, because I can use them and ask them for you. And for you also, you can ask questions. Yes, you have a question? Yeah, concerning the narrative, when I was trained in the area of climate change, I was interested in the physics aspect. I have an engineer training. So I was interested in the scientific facts. And then when I started looking at climate, I was asked to write a narrative, and I didn't understand why. But in fact, it took me some time to understand how great it was to create a utopia. You know, imagine the world in 2030, and how do we get to that change? It was great, you know. We were all there. Physics, yeah, fine. And we were very concerned by the scientific observations, by the fact things didn't move forward. But the power of the narrative, it really gave me hope. I felt it like that. So a positive narrative is very important. Once that we really understand the problem, and there is a real issue. Fine, but despite that, there are alternatives that that are desirable. And Elise, this is also something you see in the reaction to your work. And as Aline said, you know, we are very concerned and sometimes paralyzed by that concern, anxiety, and the fact of overcoming one's fear with a transformation tool, whatever our specialty. That makes it possible. Well, at least for me, it helped me turn a page, the page of the nature's representation I had. So I said, okay, well, fine, the situation is like that, but what do we do with this world, and how do we integrate all the complexity, all the dark side of that world, so that we do not just feed a regeneration aesthetics, how to take on board phenomena that are darker, to mature and overcome that and build an imaginary which makes it possible for us to be very efficient. And what I do has a curing effect on me. On top of that, it's important to exchange between the different production modes, and there are some moments of exchange. And then at the level of the restitution, you know, there's the way you receive all this and give it back. Well, we're able to see today that the new generations are in a way more structured, and this is in fact the positive window I have, and I count on that. A little message message. Could we have a glass of water for the person choking in the audience? Paul, concerning this deconstruction, that message is emotion, giving up something. How do you go about this? Because we hear there's the reaction, the action, there's a deep anger somewhere. Well, as you said, reactions are very, very personal. And there are many things that can drive, whether it's dystopia or utopia. They can be drivers. For me, personally, it's more the dystopia that led me to move. And we say dystopia. For me, it was reality. You know, this is the reality today. And either we shut our eyes, or the system we have built all together leads us to shut our eyes because it's easier to relocate so we don't see the problem. And it's a good thing to pay little money for our clothing. And all this leads us to keep our eyes shut and to move in the same direction without really seeing that there's a cliff at the end of the road. And it would be good to take action before that. So for me, yeah, there's maybe a little bit of dystopia that led me to react. And then I decided, okay, well, if we see the direction we're taking and there is a certain number of things we can do at our scale, at the scale of our company, or at the scale of the society around us, or at the level of the laws, or at the level of the voting slip we use, well, then we have to go for that path quickly and make the most of that to rebuild something altogether. And I understand it can paralyze some people because it's not easy, you know, to question fundamentals of our society, but there are more conventions, you know, things you accept. We have decided that our economy was going to work like that. We've organized a certain number of conventions, and that's the way it works. But now we're becoming aware of things, and we need to reconstruct something that is more positive. If at the same time we could integrate a social dimension, it would be even greater. But well, that dimension has been missed a bit. But it can be something positive. And there are people who are more whistleblowers. Others, you know, challenge the leaders. And in fact, they're told, "No, you're not positive enough. This is this topic," but still it's a starting point for a more positive construction. And yeah, we have to bring in people, but in the end, I think we'll be collectively happier. And there's also the fact that we all move at different speeds. There's the narrative that is embodied in objects, and with Jean-Laurent Casselli, well, I see your shoes here that can disturb some people. These shoes, well, some people could say this is a social marker. It's a symbol of wealth. So we have to move, but we don't want, in fact, separations between people. So how do you deal with that? Well, once again, the solution is not simple, and we need to listen to everyone and ask everyone to contribute. And this is why I think it is very important to move away from this idea that ecology is something for French bourgeois. And if I have these shoes, it's because I have the means to do that. Now, in the same way, if you ask someone not to use his car, even though he lives in the countryside, this is not something that the person can hear. So then it's for people to make their choice. Yes, but there's a collective direction that you have to give. We say we're going to reconstruct a world where all these things will be taken into account, and we won't leave people on the wayside saying, you know, there's no longer any petrol and you won't be able to leave your house. Yeah, imagining a utopic future in half an hour, you can all do it. But imagining the point of arrival is very clear. The direction, it's you can see it, but the narrative behind the transition or transformation, that is more difficult. I mentioned this very quickly before. You have contradictions. We're not all at the same level in terms of understanding, in terms of analysis. We don't have the same purchasing power. You know that ecological challenges are connected to social challenges. So yes, there also we need a narrative to explain why it is complicated, why we're not there. Yes, it's still 130 euros in Paris, but I'm working on building this or that sector. For example, you know, when you have someone saying, you're developing your shoes in Brazil, and then at one point the person explained to me, I looked at the whole value chain, and you know, if I'm in Brazil, there's the organic rubber, the tracing, the making, the design, keeping a price that's still acceptable. So Brazil, for example, he said, was the best place to produce the footwear. Okay, we can question that, but at least it's an explanation. It's a narrative that can, in a way, is logical. It is something that you can explain, understand, and already, you're part of a movement that is not just based on ignorance. So, of course, that is hyper complicated and long. And we have cases at Patagonia. There were some precursors where they said, okay, we do not know how to do this today, but we promise that we'll try and look into this and do something. And this is what some do. You know, the direction is there. Loom, I don't know, Patagonia, you go to their site and they tell you everything they do not know how to do. This is just what I explained now. It's explaining exactly what you are not able to do today. It gives to all partners, civil society, you know, it means collectively we're aware of that. So already when you make a choice, but an informative choice. And in fact, the direction of fast fashion and Shein, well, that's the direction we want to avoid today. So this narrative behind transition and transformation is very complicated. And in this construction, Aline, you know, yesterday we discussed this on the phone when you discovered you were invited here. So you said we have to remove the term effort from the dictionary. Why? Why did you say that? Well, as soon as we talk about a solution, people say, oh, no, we're not the Amish. No, we don't want to live in a cave. So there are many things that can be presented in a terrible way. You know, okay, it's raining. No, I can't take my car, make an effort, take the bicycle. And, you know, even if it rains a little bit, it's not a problem. So once you're aware of all the environmental issues, you won't do this or that anymore. So how can you take people on board if you only tell them about the negative aspect? As soon as you present something as an effort, people are not interested. And we don't have time to spend half a day explaining to 8 billion people what the problem is and what they should do. So even without having a understood the problem, they'll have to change. Now, for example, there are many people, for example, who do not want to reduce their meat consumption, but they see a vegetarian hamburger, for example, that is delicious, and then, you know, they just feel like trying it because it looks so good. So how can we show everyone that the alternative is also very interesting, not just for the ecological disaster? Yes, and what is quite interesting is this idea of giving up effort, the end of abundance, as our president said. It seems like an effort. It seems like giving up, but it's in the same narrative of the one we are in. So we go on with the same narrative and we ask people to do less. And there it's difficult. So we do not open another box. Well, we, men and women, when we are in a different direction, we can decide, yeah, it's great to do it like that. And then we'll be very adaptable and try it. And what appeared as giving up something in a certain framework will now sound or seem obvious in another direction. And this is the path to take. If we start telling people, you know, giving up is to be something positive. Well, it's going to take some time for us to accept this. But if we transpose the narrative, there we can start with something that is more attractive. Now, I would like you to give a word starting by R-E, re, and then a practical action. So a R-E word, Aline. Reinvent. No, you don't have time to develop the reinvent. Okay, Elise, a word. Tidal movement that in French it starts with an R. For me, resonance. And you? I'd say reduce. I would have been tempted to say reuse. And now a very short action. A great experience you can do and count the number of clothing items you have, because we underestimate the number of clothes we have. And then you should sort, keep those you really wear, those you don't wear. And since you're all very much aware of the challenges we have, imagine what this could represent at the level of France. So please do that when you go home. Okay. Go and see the pioneer brands, Loom, Patagonia, all the things they say they don't know how to do, as well as 1083. Elise, I would say you should read Timothy Morton. Aline, to have the humility of doubting what you already know. Thank you very much for your contributions. So goodbye. Now, of course, we cannot end the day like this without talking with a player that plays a great role today, and that's Vinted. Now, we have Roxane Bayoko that I would like to invite here. She will be moderating because my English is not good enough, let's say. Roxane, I leave you on stage. You will have a video conference with Marianne Gibbles. Hello, Marianne.
Hi, Roxane. How are you?
Everything is okay. So we're here with all the participants. So everyone was really looking forward to seeing you. Can you hear me okay? Everything is fine?
I can now hear you. Yes.
Okay.
There we go.
Great. So Marianne, just to introduce you to Marianne, so she has been recently nominated to join Vinted as the Senior Sustainability Director. So she has just started to work within Vinted, but she was really willing to be here with you today. So when we started discussing with Marianne, the first question I had for her was, how did Vinted manage to make secondhand sexy? Because a few years ago, people who used to buy secondhand clothes, they did it for necessity, out of necessity. But now it has become out of pleasure. Even if you don't need to buy secondhand because you could afford buying new clothes, you do buy secondhand because you like it. It has become like a game. You're scrolling on Vinted, just like you do it on Instagram. So my question is how Vinted did this magical trick to make secondhand become sexy and attractive. That's my first question for you.
Well, I wish we can claim credits for making all secondhand sexy, which I don't think is the case, but we definitely made an effort on, for sure, making it easier. I think what we see is secondhand is not a trend, but it's a long-term general change that started multiple years ago. We're not at the origin of the boom, I would say, but we always try to encourage and facilitate the transition of secondhand by making it affordable, ease of use to trade secondhand via an app, and with an accessible alternative for new fashion to make it part of the daily life. So our main goal actually was to make sure that, especially in the alternative part, to make secondhand as easy to use, to buy, to find as new, and with that actually living up to Vinted's mission of making secondhand first choice. And what we saw over time is that in our early stage, we appeal to a core audience that is the 18 to 24-year-olds, the very conscious generation Y and Z that wants to buy more sustainable. And now we slowly see that number in that audience also growing towards the 25 to 40-year-old. So reaching a way more broader audience because secondhand has become a proper alternative to new. And I think that all has to do with two things. First of all, I think it's generational thing that we have become more aware and about the choices that we want to make in our fashion purchases. And the second thing is then I think this is the secret sauce of Vinted. It's really, like I said, that ease of use on providing you with the options that you're actually looking for and making sure that it becomes as accessible as a new fashion item.
And it works because there was a recent study conducted by Boston Consulting Group saying that now 7 people out of 10 buy secondhand clothes, and that Vinted has become the second favorite e-commerce platform of French people. So it's a huge impact and a huge increase in quite a short period of time. And I was curious to know about the history of secondhand, because Vinted comes from Lithuania. It's not French. So now it has expanded in many countries in Europe. But I guess each country has a special relationship to secondhand markets and to clothes. And France and Italy, we have a special relationship. So did you manage to measure how each country behave in terms of secondhand? Are there any big differences? How do you develop your market and your strategy on each country?
Well, we for sure see that there's a big update in France. So France is a super mature market to us. I think overall Vinted has 65 million users and 22 million of that come out of France for us. So our guess is the fashion-minded country like France already quite familiar with secondhand and the positioning of secondhand. So with the origin of vintage, looking at those beautiful items that you want to buy, it was very easy for the French audience to actually adapt to buying secondhand and doing that on a more daily basis, and actually doing that instead of buying new. So also, there's a lot of familiarity in France with online and e-commerce shopping. So that was already quite a big uptake in that. So you don't have to tell the market how to use an app or how to buy clothes online. You just provide them with a secondhand option. And we also saw a massive uptake in the no fees for seller policy that we introduced in 2016. We really saw more people starting to sell from that part, which was super appealing to the French sellers. They started to list more. And then what we saw is that when you actually increase that catalog, you automatically start to attract more buyers. So this virtuous circle of actually creating more supply, showing that we can actually offer what you're looking for, then will attract more buyers. Those buyers also get inspired and become sellers. And that is actually how the market actually accelerated in France, and France became our biggest market. Big difference with other markets that we see, not so much, although it's more, the French market doesn't behave more differently. It's just the speed of adoption that we actually see. And the overall French audience buys more secondhand. So in France, it's 74% of all French people bought a secondhand item in the last 12 months. But in Germany, that's only 66% to compare.
So it's very much about changing consumer patterns and I guess sending out a different message, a new message to consumers. Have you been working on this? I mean, Vinted has been working on how to send out a different message, and what would be this message?
Well, I think what Vinted is trying to show is that secondhand is a proper alternative to new, and that everyone has a beautiful item in their wardrobe that can use a second life. So there is a big positive, of course, on lengthening the lifetime of a garment. But we all know how we now currently consume fashion. Sometimes we buy something we don't like because we wear it a few times, we don't feel comfortable in it. Sometimes it doesn't fit anymore. There is always a reason why stuff stays behind in your closet. What Vinted is trying to show is that there's value in the closet that is unworn, and that there are other people looking for that item. And I think the message is really making that connection to our sellers to make sure that we actually are able to offer those beautiful garments to the buyers that are looking for them. And I think our core message is secondhand first choice again. You don't have to look for a new item first. Go for that secondhand option first, because that is a proper alternative. And with more and more people actually sharing their wardrobe, the chances that you'll actually find what you're looking for become bigger and bigger every day.
And indeed, it had become so successful that now, even on Vinted, we can observe quite a weird behavior that is very typical to mankind, that is this consumption bulimia, that it has become so easy to buy clothes on Vinted that it's like it takes 2 seconds to literally buy a new clothes on Vinted. So in 5 minutes, you can buy 10 items and you don't even realize that you've paid for that. So do you think Vinted has a, let's say, social role, social responsibility in the years to come in educating consumers, in rethinking how we should consume? Because at the end of the day, yes, we buy secondhand, it's a first good step, but we'll still buy a lot of clothes. We do not necessarily reduce our consumption because we buy secondhand and it's cheaper. So we're still in the same mechanism of consuming a lot of products. So do you think this is something you should work on? How Vinted can maybe just work on this educational process?
Yeah, I think you said it correctly. this is actually changing consumer behavioral patterns that need to happen here. And this is not something that's done overnight. So we are in here for the long run. What we're trying to show is that when people buy better, first of all, make sure you buy secondhand first. We want to prevent the overproduction by maximizing the lifetime of the garments that are already produced. So instead of having something hang in your closet, make sure that someone else can buy it, so that we prevent actually the production of a new item by at least a certain percentage. Then the second thing is, I think by showing the opportunities on Vinted to actually sell your item, we're also increasing a mindset to show that you have beautiful items in your closet that you can buy better. So it's not only making sure that you buy secondhand first, it's also hopefully trying to switch the mindset to look at what you buy. The higher quality items are also the items that you can sell easier afterwards if you're not happy with it. So what we're trying to show here is that while getting as much people in on adopting into secondhand, we actually want to switch them towards a more conscious awareness about the stuff that they buy, and that they buy better, because buying better increases the quality of a garment, the lifetime of a garment, etc., which totally fits sort of that circular pattern that we're trying to create here. So although it's very difficult for Vinted to, as one platform in the fashion industry, completely change consumer mindsets about how we shop and how we want to consume, we hope at least that with the change of mindset, first of all, look at secondhand first. Second of all, make people aware that the lengthening of the lifetime of the garment is a good thing, and that a high quality garment actually has a longer lifespan. With that, we hope to create some awareness around that, and actually ultimately prevent part of the overproduction that's currently happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. And it makes a, let's say, natural link to my last question, which is about, because you spoke about awareness, which is a first step in the sustainability purpose. And as you just started with Vinted and you have like huge challenges in front of you, my last question was, what are the key challenges you have as sustainable director in the months to come, in the years, your personal ones, and maybe like the let's say the corporate ones that you would like to share today, because you're our last speaker. So that's my last question for today.
Well, I think for the long-term goal, I think it's exactly what you just described. So it's really my challenge. How do we actually change that consumer pattern? How do we make sure that actually out of fashion becomes in, and we start changing our mindset about how we consume fashion, when we need to buy, what we're buying, how often we're buying, and then if we're buying secondhand first, or do it actually needs to be new? So changing the value of clothes from immediate to long-term, the buy better, higher quality, keep longer, that's a challenge that we have for ourselves. That is something that we slowly need to start ingraining into our audience, that with our own message that we put out there and the way that we nudge people to what they buy, that's something that we need to influence. It's not something that will change overnight, but it's definitely where we're going towards. And then on the other hand, on a more shorter term, you can definitely see, of course, buying on Vinted has the positive impact of lengthening the lifetime of a garment, but that package needs to get from a buyer to a seller.
Yeah.
So there is a direct...
So how do we work on this shipping, shipping question? Do we receive our clothes at home? Do we pick it up somewhere in town? That if we live in the countryside, we have pickup points around?
Pickup points are for sure a massive solution to us. So you also see Vinted and stuff that you buy on Vinted massively pushing towards pickup points, because our research shows that pickup points have a 42% less impact than delivery to home. And that is because the routes towards a pickup point are more direct, the inefficient routes from one home to another, and actually the bounce rate from delivery to home is way higher. So we're now focusing a lot on the pickup points and actually putting more pickup points in place to reduce that pickup points, to increase that pickup point density and making sure that that becomes more efficient. So at least the direct impact that we are creating as Vinted from having to sell something secondhand online from buyer to seller is minimized. Other things that we're also doing is the buying in bundles option, just to optimize that route of transport. So for me, that is a strong focus for the short term, while in the long term, continuously changing, thinking about changing that consumer behavior and changing those consumer patterns.
So starting with changing things on the field, on the ground, and like in the long term, changing mindsets.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time, Marianne. And maybe we can pick up 1 or 2 questions from the chat if we do have 1 minute left, if there is one. So, no question from the chat. Questions from the audience? Okay. Well, thank you very much. And je te laisse la parole pour la conclusion avec Maud.
Thank you for having me.
Merci.
And I give you the floor back for the conclusion with Maud. Thank you very much, Marianne. So the time has come to conclude. We have 4 or 5 minutes left. And for that, I'd like to invite Maud Hardy back on the stage with your applause, of course. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm very lucky because I get to conclude this beautiful day. And I took notes. Are you all fine here? Are you all well here in the audience in this room? Yes? Yes, I want to hear you. Okay. How about online? Everyone's fine online? Good. So this is the end of the second edition of Refashion Day. I want you to know that it was labeled Circular Week by the European Commission, and it concludes the Fashion Week here. So I think that you've enjoyed today's interventions and exchanges. We saw production, we saw consumption, and we saw regeneration, the 3 topics. As far as I'm concerned, I will retain 3 key teachings I'd like to share with you. First of all, transformation is a collective effort. Cooperation and construction are to be developed without any limit. Second lesson, constraints via creativity. Well, obviously, we're going to have to find the way. We need to work on this. And third point, to conclude, I'd like to tell you the word said by Eric Berger this morning, the Shift Project, and that was that happiness is in action. I think that's beautiful, and that's really what animates us at Refashion. We are animated by action. Have you seen that Béranger Séguin, the Secretary of State for Ecology, has launched a major consultation on the future of the textile sector? I see people in the room saying yes. The consultation on the new project for the technical specs of this sector will be open until the 26th of October. And I would like to encourage you to have your team speak about the future of this sector, how you want this sector to transform itself to be more circular. You know, France was a precursor here when it adopted its law 14 years ago. This has been followed by Italy, Belgium, Sweden, and Spain. We continue to be a reference country in this area. So together we want to build the future of the textile sector in Europe. We count on you. We're motivated by this, and we hope to hear you in the future. I must conclude with a word that starts with RE. Exactly, I was going to ask you. And so, in fact, I would like to take a word that starts with RE, which was suggested by one of my colleagues, re-energy. And you know that, in fact, we are here to bring together all of the stakeholders, all of the participants in this sector. So we are going to ask here reunite, re-energy, reinvent, reuse. So I think this has been an excellent day. I would like to thank all of the Refashion team. And I would like to thank all of those who have worked with me on this event. I'd like to thank you because this event was thus able to take place. And I'd like to make a date with you for next year, somewhere in another site perhaps, but for the 3rd edition of Refashion Day. In the meantime, commit yourself and let's transform this sector. Thank you, Maud. I would like to say a word to those who are online. You have the possibility of giving us feedback for this event. You know, every event, in fact, is obviously going to be assessed. So thank you very much. Give us your feedback and have a great evening. Thank you.